Hey everybody, this is Matt Yancey, Deputy Commissioner with the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. First, just want to say thank you for joining us at this year's IPS virtual conference. I tell you, the theme for this year really hits the nail on the head: wellness through employment. We often say that the first treatment plan goal should always be employment, especially for those living with serious mental illness and substance use disorder. When you think about creating a sense of purpose, a sense of pride, a sense of community, and being a part of something bigger than oneself, a good job can provide for all of those things. The research is pretty clear. A meaningful job leads to a better quality of life and to improved wellness. As it relates to Tennesseans struggling with behavioral health issues, we know that IPS-supported employment is an evidence-based treatment. Through the leadership of our Office of Employment and Wellness Director, Mark Liverman, through a committed, passionate network of community behavioral health providers, and through sister state agencies like the Tennessee Department of Human Services, more people in Tennessee are receiving IPS-supported employment services than ever before. In fiscal year 2020, over 1,100 Tennesseans living with mental illness received IPS-supported employment. Of that number, almost 120 were transition-age youth. The most exciting part, however, is that close to 60% of those served through IPS still had a job at 90 days. A big kudos to you for helping people find jobs and helping them maintain employment. I'm really excited to see what the future holds in IPS for the state of Tennessee. I sincerely appreciate everything that you do in helping people struggling with mental health issues and substance use issues find recovery, become resilient, and live lives of independence in their community. Again, enjoy today's conference. Thanks for all that you do, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sherelle Campbell-Street, the Deputy Commissioner for the Tennessee Department of Human Services, and I am so happy to be with you today to talk about a program that's helping improve the lives of people dealing with mental health challenges within our state. When we first started the Individualized Placement and Support Program back in 2012, we were hoping to create a better solution to the question of how can we provide better services and specialized training for individuals who needed that extra support. At that time, employment opportunities were provided after conventional interventions were completed. Long-term success was far-reaching and mostly inconsistent. My department, along with representatives from the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, as well as the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, began meeting to come up with a better way to assist people with significant mental health challenges succeed in employment. Our department began working with a small number of mental health providers to implement IPS on a smaller scale. Our plan was to grow the program over time and gain buy-in from other providers. Well, I'm happy to say today I was a part of making Tennessee a national IPS leader, offering services that are responsive, welcoming, informative, and encouraging to individuals facing mental health challenges and substance abuse problems. Thank you so much for everybody being present today, and I look forward to even growing this program bigger. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Nicole Phillips, and I'm one of the statewide IPS trainers. I'm really excited to introduce our next keynote speaker, Dr. Patricia Deegan. Dr. Deegan is a principal with Pat Deegan & Associates, and for over 30 years, Pat has been a thought leader and disruptive innovator in the field of behavioral health recovery. Pat founded a company run by and for people in recovery. The mission, to safeguard human dignity by bringing individual voice and choice to the center of the clinical care team. She also developed the Common Ground program, the Hearing Distressing Voices simulation, as well as helping with the development of the On Track New York model. Pat is an activist in the disability rights movement and has lived her own journey of recovery after being diagnosed with schizophrenia as a teenager. She has held several academic appointments, has numerous publications, and has carried a message of hope of recovery for audiences around the world. We're super excited to have her with us today at Tennessee's IPS conference. Please welcome Dr. Patricia Deegan.
Hey folks, my name is Pat Deegan and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. The talk that I'm going to give today is called Work and the Dignity of Risk. I am coming to you from Massachusetts, and with the pandemic and all, we're doing the best we can to continue to move forward in our field and to bring the good news that recovery is for everyone to all of the folks that we work with, despite these kind of wild times. And I'm reminded as we're working here in the pandemic and reaching out to people who are vulnerable and who are wanting to begin to rebuild their lives, that this work that we do is really not about the paycheck. I think most of us understand that there are a lot easier ways to make a living than working in public sector mental health. So I always like to start off by thinking about, like, why do we do this work? Why do we do this work? Why do you show up at work in the morning and come back the next day? Because this work can be challenging. We're dealing with folks with complex challenges, a lot of upstream determinants of ill health, and a lot of challenges moving forward with life, especially when a serious mental illness comes into our lives. So what is it that calls us to this work? And I think that each of us has a different answer to that question, to the why of coming to work each day. But I think it's critically important for those of us who last longer than 6 months in this work to be able to articulate our why it is that we show up every day to this challenging and at times extremely rewarding work. And I think the answer is because all of us at some point in our lives have passed through a period of vulnerability ourselves, have gone through a time in life where sort of life knocked us down in an unexpected way. Maybe it was the death of a loved one or a child. Maybe it was a miscarriage. Maybe it was growing up in an alcoholic home. Maybe it was your own experience with mental health challenges. But no matter what this passage was that you made, you know something about life knocking you down and then finding and feeling like maybe I'll never be able to get up again. Maybe I can't, move forward with my life. And yet somehow you did. Somehow you did. And that we came through that difficult passage, we came out the other side, transformed, if you will, with a sense of humility, but also a sense of hope that I thought maybe I couldn't make it, but I did make it. And that hope, I believe, is the flame within us. It is the greatest gift that we have to offer the people we work with. That gift of hope that we know through our own lived experience, no matter what our challenge was, that that human life can continue even despite real challenges. And the passage that we thought might, knock us down and keep us down, the passage we thought might in fact be the end of us, actually became a life-giving experience, right? And when we can plug into that story, our story of why it is we do this work, then we want to move forward and to bring this gift of hope to the people that we're working with. And it is a gift. There was a time when it was thought that people diagnosed with serious mental disorders could never be well, could never live life, and needed to spend life in human warehouses and institutions. But I think those of us working particularly in the individual placement and support field, understanding the power and value of work, can carry that message of hope that people can return to work, that people can return to school, that people can live lives of high meaning and purpose. And so today, the talk that I'm going to give is again called Work and the Dignity of Risk. And I love this word dignity because the word dignity comes from a Latin root meaning dignus, meaning to be of worth, to be of value. And that's the core message that we have when we encounter, when we meet with, when we connect with a person that we're working with. Not only is there hope for returning to a full life of high meaning and purpose, but also that the individual that we're meeting with is a person of worth, a person of value, that in affirming the dignity of the person we're listening to, by listening to them, by seeing them, and by sharing with them our hope for recovery, we are affirming human dignity. And that encounter, when we meet somebody on a level playing field of what I call the level playing field of our shared humanity, that's how recovery-oriented work begins. Not with us and them, or I know everything I need to know and I can help you who's down here. That's not how it begins. Real recovery-oriented work begins on a level playing field where we find the common ground of our shared humanity with the individual that we're working with, and all of the work progresses from that moment. And so I bring you this slide to begin with, because I think in some ways this slide says it all. This was me back pre-pandemic. I was giving a lecture in Tel Aviv, Israel. And I am using perhaps one of my favorite slides. I am a person, not an illness. And this is where the work begins. This is where it all starts. And the way I see it, I am a person. I am not, and I have never been a schizophrenic. The people that you work with, the people that you care about are not psychotics, and we're not the mentally ill. We are people, not disorders. And precisely because we are fully human, there is hope. Our shared humanity is the common ground from which our work begins. It's possible for people to live their lives, not their diagnosis, because we are more than our diagnosis. And if we reduce a person to being an illness or being a schizophrenic or being a bipolar, then there's no one left to do the hard work of recovery. Illnesses do not recover, people recover. So the very first task when meeting with people is to discover the person who is there, who is our recovery partner. So I'm going to start today by sharing with you a little bit about my own journey of recovery. My story begins when I was 17 years old, and I was a senior in high school up here in Massachusetts. And I was a really good athlete in high school, and loved varsity sports, was a terrible student, got that perfect C-, so I stayed eligible for varsity sports. And then during the break between Christmas and New Year's, I experienced a first episode of psychosis. Eventually, I guess I should say a few words about what that was like. I remember when it first started, I was on a basketball court with my team and we had practice that day. And I began to notice that I was hearing these very distressing, kind of awful voices. I had had these before, but never of the duration. These were just kind of relentless and just wouldn't talk and wouldn't stop. And the thing that's interesting about distressing voices is that they really grab you by the gut. You know how if you're at church and the preacher's kind of boring, you can kind of just, block that on out. You can't do that at the beginning with these very powerful voices. Even though they didn't yell or scream, they in fact could sometimes be very, very soft. But I felt like they grabbed me by the gut. They were all knowing, all powerful, all seeing, and they were saying really terrible things about me. And at the time, I felt rather engulfed by it and couldn't focus on a whole lot else. I also noticed that I became kind of uncoordinated on the basketball court, and that I was, kind of just not being able to be in sync very much with my teammates, probably because I was really distracted. So I went home to my coach said, why don't you just go home? So I did, and my family, noticed that things weren't right. So you can imagine that eventually I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. And once I got to the psychiatric hospital, I was pretty promptly diagnosed with schizophrenia. And at that time, I was told that schizophrenia is a disease that's a lot like diabetes, and that I would be ill for the rest of your life. So I was all of 17, 18 years old by now. Schizophrenia is a disorder from which no one gets well, and I would be sick for the rest of my life. And the specific words I was told is, Miss Deegan, you have a disease called schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a lot like diabetes. Just like a diabetic will have to take insulin for the rest of their lives, Ms. Deegan, you're going to have to take haloperidol for the rest of your life. And I was put on very high dose haloperidol, and I was discharged from the hospital sometime later and back to my family's house. And at the time of discharge, I was told to take your meds, take your meds, take your meds, take your meds. Don't forget to take your meds. Because clearly my clinical team thought that was the most important thing, really the only important thing. And the only other instruction was, besides take your meds, was avoid stress and be sure to come for your weekly med checks and then monthly med checks. So essentially I was told to retire from life. And I've come to call this a prognosis of doom, because I'll be honest with you, this prognosis of doom, this idea that I would be chronically ill for the rest of my life, essentially eclipsed my future. It left me hopeless. It left me with no pathway into the future life that I wanted for myself. One of the things that I wanted for myself was to be a high school athletic coach, and yet I was being told that entire future was now closed off to me, and that all I was left with was a meaningless succession of days and nights and days in life and nights going nowhere in my young life. Well, one of my definitions of recovery is that recovery is a pathway into the life that I want for myself, the life I want to live. I wanted a life that had some friendship in it. I wanted to date. And maybe I was interested in going to college to become a coach of women's lacrosse teams. But I was told that these very things that I wanted for my life were no longer possible for me. But rather, I would just simply be sick and wait out my days avoiding stress. Now, in my opinion, the professionals around me made a very profound and fundamental error with this prognosis of doom, because what they were doing is they were focusing on treating a disease process. They were focused on treating schizophrenia rather than collaborating with me as a person working on my recovery. In fact, they had reduced me to being a schizophrenic. So there I sat in a chair in my family's home, and I had become an outstanding cigarette smoker while I was in a psychiatric hospital. And essentially, I lapsed into what I've come to call the Coke and Smoke syndrome. So essentially, what I did all day long was to drink high-test Coca-Cola and to smoke cigarettes. And the smoke and Coke syndrome was a time of abject despair for me, abject despair. It really was a terrible time because, and of course, everyone around me, all the professionals were telling my family, this is because Pat has the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Well, was it the negative symptoms of schizophrenia, or was it despair at having lost my entire future? It's almost impossible to have any hope at all if there is no future, right? And for me, I was told there was no future. And so I sat and I I did a lot of sleeping. I slept from 8 o'clock at night till 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd get up, I'd have breakfast, I'd sit in a chair. I sat in a smoke-filled, hermetically sealed cloud. I didn't need a TV on. I didn't need a radio on. I didn't need anything other than cigarettes. Really, I took a nap in the afternoon. I remember a friend coming over to visit me, and not only did I have nothing to say to my friend, but I remember looking at the clock, and saying, "Oh, gee, it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to bed," and walking out right in the middle of her visit, as if I didn't even care, because the truth was, kind of in a way, I had stopped caring. I had given up. I think sometimes people give up because it's a way to preserve ourselves from the ultimate despair, I think, right? The anguish of it. If I say, well, I don't care about it, I just don't care, then you can't take it away from me. I can't lose it, right? So I minimize risks at risk, and it's a very protective place to be. So not caring sometimes can be an effort to ward off despair. It takes a lot of courage to get knocked down by life and a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and then to start caring about anything again. That can take time. But the truth was, the professionals told me, it doesn't make sense to care about anything, because you can't really have the life you want. So I was protecting myself with this not caring strategy. In any case, in my opinion, the despair was more disabling than the psychosis. And people, this is really important, people can't organize their recovery in a vacuum. We can't organize our recovery around nothingness, right? We have to organize our recovery around something. And this is the myth of stabilization and maintenance. If we can just maintain them and keep them stable in the community, no worries. And that's what my team was thinking, right? That's what my team was thinking. They were thinking, oh, we're going to stop the progression of this disease called schizophrenia. And the fact that she's not getting any worse, sure, she's not getting any better, but the fact that she's not getting worse is actually success. But that's the stabilization model. That's the maintenance model, okay? And it wasn't enough. I needed a life. I needed a pathway into the life I want for myself. And that is precisely what's so important about what you guys do. Work, school, these things matter. They give us a future horizon, and they give us the promise that with hard work, we too can have a life of meaning and high purpose. So in any case, I offer you some insights now, or they're memes basically that I'm going to show you, but they capture some essential wisdom about the recovery process. The first is, we need to let folks know that they can live their lives, not their diagnosis. I will live my life, not my diagnosis. Reducing symptoms is not enough. Not hearing voices, not having false beliefs is not enough. I need to be able to do something with my life. That sense of meaning, that sense of purpose grounds my reality and is key to the recovery process. And that leads me to a second principle, and that is that our dreams are the stars that guide our journey of recovery. I think there's a great myth out there that first people have to get well, and then they can start to achieve goals. But the truth is, it actually works the opposite way. If I have my goals, my hopes, my aspirations, what I want to do with my life, if I have that as my guide, if I have people like my peer specialist and my therapist and my psychiatrist and my employment specialist supporting me and saying, we begin with your stars, with your dreams, aspirations, hopes, that's the beginning. And treatment becomes a means to an end of helping you get to where you want to be in your life. That's recovery-oriented practice. And then finally, what this means in terms of how we work with people is that we need to be focusing with people starting on day one on what matters to the individual. Focus on what matters. Put the focus on, take the focus off of what's the matter with you, Pat, and put the focus onto what matters to you, Pat. Because if we can do that, if we can put the focus on what matters to Pat, then the team can get behind me in using care and treatment as a means to the goal that I want for my life. So for me personally, I began I actually began by going out food shopping with my grandmother. That was the first active step I took in my recovery. And it took me many, many, many months to even do that. The key was that my grandmother came into my hermetically sealed, smoke-filled room every day, once a day, and said, "Patricia, would you like to go food shopping?" And I would say no and dismiss her. But then, for reasons I don't understand, one day I said yes. And that's the grace of recovery, right? That's the mystery at the heart of recovery. I said yes. I would only push the cart. I wouldn't put anything in it. But my gosh, I did it. I went food shopping. The big step I took in my recovery was sometime later after that, when I did one course in English Composition 1 at Massasoit Community College, a few towns away from where I was staying at my family's house. And once I did that, it was very, very difficult because I didn't even know if I could sit through a class. I brought a tape recorder to record the classes so I could listen when I wasn't as anxious and stressed. In any case, I began making choices, and they weren't always the best choices, for sure. In fact, I got hospitalized right in the middle of the semester and had to complete my coursework over the following summer, but eventually I got those 3 credits. And, it was like climbing Mount Everest for me, but I did it. But note that I had to be able to have some setbacks, that was part of my progress. So sometimes that defies logic a little bit. Oh, a setback is part of your progress, but the truth is it was. I went to the hospital in the middle of the semester. It wasn't the end of the world. I was able to continue to move forward because I had the support to help me do it. And so I began making choices. And choice and dignity are inextricably linked. I felt like I was getting my dignity back once I began to exercise choices and to steer my life in the direction I wanted it to go. So with dignity and with choice comes risk. Hence, what I want to do today is to talk to you about this thing called the dignity of risk and the duty to care. And we're going to start with an example of a person that we'll call Angela. Angela is a 22-year-old young adult with a diagnosis of early psychosis. She's been working with a team for 6 months. She's very interested in getting a job, but has refused the support of the team's employment specialist. She's been searching local want ads and online job boards and says she wants the satisfaction of finding work on her own. Well, during her last visit with the team, Angela reported that she was excited about having a job interview scheduled. And she said the job was telemarketing, making phone calls, quote unquote. And the interview, interestingly, was in a town nearly 15 miles away. And when asked the name of the company, Angela said that the man that she spoke with on the phone didn't mention the name of the company. The address where the interview would take place, because the team Googled the address with her on Google Map, was in a residential neighborhood. Sounded a little fishy. And Angela's big idea is that she would like the employment specialist to give her a ride to this interview, drop her off, and then she would take the bus home. Well, the team really was hesitant and felt very conflicted about supporting Angela's request. They're concerned, of course, that she's being lured into an unsafe situation. She has a history of being sexually abused in childhood, and's been involved in an abusive relationship with a boyfriend who took money from her and was squatting in her apartment for a period of time. He was a pretty shady kind of character. So I think we're faced with the question then, how should the team respond? Sure, in recovery-oriented practice, we understand the importance of supporting people's dignity by supporting the choices that they make. But as we listen to Angela's story, right, I think we can feel ourselves kind of torn in two directions. And the reason we're torn in two directions is because we really care about Angela. So, on the one hand, we want to do recovery-oriented work, and we want to support Angela's choice and her self-direction. But on the other hand, we're concerned that she may be making a dangerous choice, and we want to protect Angela and keep her from harm. And I think that this is a very well-known gray area that I'm describing here. A lot of the work in behavioral health happens in this gray area, this area of wanting to support Angela's choice, but also to protect Angela. And it's not like we could just create a cookbook and say, if this, then that, if this, then do that, okay? When we, precisely because we care about Angela, we find ourselves with this feeling as a team that we feel conflicted. We feel conflicted. Now, the key to working in a recovery-oriented fashion with Angela is not to allow our internal feeling of being conflicted about her choice. We don't let that feeling of being conflicted become a conflict between the team and Angela, right? We don't want to go there. So in recovery-oriented practice, we want to find ourselves side by side with people, even when we're in this conflicted gray zone. I call it the conflicted zone, right? We want to be side with people. We don't want to be butting heads with them, or we've already lost, right? So I've developed a framework for teams to apply when navigating these really complex cross currents related to risk and self-determination. The very first step is learning to navigate what I call the neglect, overprotect continuum. So I hope you can see, or if you're listening, you need to visualize a continuum with neglect on the far left and overprotect on the far right. And when discussing how to approach a situation like Angela's, the teams, I think in general, initially trend toward overprotective responses. Overprotective responses are those in which essentially the team tries to make the decision for Angela, not because the team is evil, but because the team really cares about Angela, right? And sometimes, unfortunately, this can take the form of trying to bribe or in some way coerce an individual into, quote, making the right choice, making the right choice. So what might be an example of an overprotective response? Well, I've seen more than once offering to take Angela, for instance, for a special meal during the exact same time when the interview is scheduled, okay? Or suggesting that Angela may be endangering herself, and if she follows through with this appointment, we may need to talk about hospitalization, which of course is coercive. It's using fear-based intervention, and in the long run is really not a protective response at all. Now, I also noticed that if on the neglect protect continuum, if overprotective efforts are unsuccessful, teams will often swing to the other side of the continuum. And this is particularly true if the team has seen the individual making the same poor choice with bad results over time. It's only natural for team members to get frustrated. We're human beings too, right? And you can hear the frustration, the team's frustration, in comments like this. We'll just have to let this person hit bottom and suffer the natural consequences of their actions. That's the only way they're going to learn. For me, that word, suffer natural consequences, is a red flag when I'm consulting with teams. It's indicative of the team sort of throwing their hands up and saying, well, she's got, excuse me, she's going to have to suffer the natural consequences of her choice. She might have to hit bottom. You know, that kind of stepping back is really indicative of neglect and really is not recovery-oriented work. Another thing I hear out there often is, well, you know, that Pat Deegan says that choice and supporting choice is, you know, fundamental to recovery-oriented practice. So I guess we'll just let this person make their own choice, and the team kind of and steps back. Well, this, of course, is not empowerment. This is neglect, right? This is neglect. If we let them do what they're going to do, if we let them make their own choice, and it's the key is in that stepping back. What's happened is we've swung over to the neglect side of the continuum. So, neglect, overprotect. This is where these are the extremes we want to stay away from. In recovery-oriented practice, teams can strive to avoid these extremes of neglect and overprotect. And there are two principles that can help the team navigate those extremes. And the first is the duty to care. And the second principle is the dignity of risk. And importantly, you don't just apply one principle, but forget about the other one. They're both applied at the same time. And if we can do that, then we're going to be able to steer away from, we can steer a recovery-oriented course away from these extremes of neglect and overprotect. So what is the duty to care? Well, the duty to care means that teams have a responsibility to remain engaged with individuals no matter what choice they are making. That's really a big deal. No matter what choice they are making. Here on the cusp of what might be a not so good choice, Angela needs the team more than ever. Now is not the time to step back and throw our hands up and find ourselves in a neglectful place. She needs us now. The other principle is the dignity of risk, the dignity of risk. The dignity of risk comes from the disability rights movement. The idea or the principle of the dignity of risk evolved from the lived experience of people with all sorts of disabilities, and it became, the dignity of risk, a cry for self-governance and self-determination over our own lives. And I think it's also important to remember that Angela's choice about attending the interview is also an expression of her self-governance, and that overriding her choice is not benign. Overriding her choice is actually a form of toxic help. And I define toxic help as help that hurts. And a lot of the time when we go in with overprotective or neglectful responses, what we're doing is giving people help that actually hurts in the long run, help that fails to reinforce people's dignity. Now, I want to tell you a story, because I think we remember stories best, about where I first learned about the dignity of risk. I had this friend named Charlie Carr. And when Charlie was around the age I was, a teenager, that was the age I was when I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, Charlie broke his back and became quadriplegic. He was put in a long-term care facility after being medically stabilized. And essentially, Charlie was also put into a situation where his entire life was medicalized, and the idea would be that he would live out the rest of his days in a long-term nursing care facility. And that was the best he could hope for with his life. In fact, his future had been eclipsed through a prognosis of doom as well. Charlie, eventually, this would be in the 60s and early 70s, well, I think it was a little bit later than that, but it was in the 70s, I think, that the disability rights movement was really up and running, and Charlie became a young, active member of the disability rights movement, and he and others were petitioning for ramps and other means by which he could access going to school. And I remember him he said he was going to go to Boston University. And so Charlie went ahead and they succeeded in getting things like ramps, but they also got apartments and dormitories. This was huge because it meant that Charlie could move out of his long-term nursing care facility and move on to campus just like any other young person going to college. And Charlie said that the nurses would warn him, not because they were being wanting to hurt him or any way, but they really cared about Charlie, and they didn't want him to go out into an apartment and to end up with, say, rug burns and a serious medical complication that would set him back. But Charlie was gung-ho, and he moved out to his apartment, and at the time he had a personal care attendant who was paid by Charlie to support his self-care needs while he lived independently in his apartment. And Charlie describes the first night in this apartment, and he's in his electric wheelchair. And, you know, the nurses had told him, be careful, don't get an apartment with a shag rug. And of course, you know, like a young person, he goes and gets an apartment with a shag rug on campus. His attendant leaves around 11 o'clock at night, and Charlie, within a short period of time, ends up face planting on his shag rug from his electric wheelchair and spent the night with rug burns on the floor until the attendant came back. Now, we might feel aghast at that, but Charlie describes it as the most wonderful moment in his young life to that point, that he had made a lousy choice. It was his choice. He was testing the limits of his possibility, and guess what? He found out he had some limits. And he said that moment, that experience of making a choice, even though he fell flat on his face, was defining for him, was really defining for him. And if we had been in there preventing that, perhaps he wouldn't have gotten there as quickly as he did. But that's what the dignity of risk is all about, and that's where people with disabilities were coming from when they said, hey, we want to make our own choices too, just like people who do not have disabilities. And so I want to say a word about why this dignity of risk is so important. And I have one other thing to say about Charlie. Charlie went on to become the commissioner of the Department of Voc Rehab in Massachusetts. So Charlie did just fine for himself after graduating out of BU. Anyway, I want to say a word now about this principle and dig deep into why it's so important. And I'm going to read this because it really says it, and I'm going to read it slow. When we take risks and try something new, we test our limits and learn about our capabilities. If others try to protect us by not allowing us to take risks, they prevent us from learning about the full reaches of our potential, capabilities, and capacities. And that's why I say that the dignity of risk is a way of affirming human dignity, of affirming when we support someone's choice, we're affirming their dignity. When we hear someone's choice, we affirm their dignity. The dignity of risk emphasizes the importance of choice and self-determination as affirmations of our human dignity. And when we support people in making their own choices, we're affirming their dignity. And this, my friends, is deeply healing. Remember that connection and relationships are our most important tool when we're working with people. And as we get to know a person that we're working with, our risk tolerance becomes wider. We're able to tolerate more of the choices that people are making, right? And so the dignity of risk is the key to doing recovery-oriented practice. So what we're doing with the dignity of risk and the duty to care, we're going to apply them together, and that's going to help to guide the team away from the extremes of neglect and overprotect. Now we're going to apply this to Angela's situation, okay? Angela's situation. So how would we apply the duty to care and the dignity of risk for Angela? Well, here are some ideas. We want to avoid those extremes of neglect and overprotect. We're not going to offer to take her out for a meal at exactly the time when the interview is supposed to happen, and we're not going to throw our hands up and say, we'll let her hit bottom and then she'll come around and suffer the natural consequences. We're not going to go there. Instead, one thing we might think about is helping Angela understand the team's concern, why we're feeling conflicted, and ask her to teach back so that she can affirm that, in fact, she's heard. We might review information about employment scams with her, because this could be an employment scam. So we want to get her some information. Maybe we want to complete a decisional balance worksheet with Angela, not just hand it to her, but do it together and look at the pros and cons, right? The pros and cons of the situation, and help her explore what her options are. We might want to help Angela develop a safety plan. Okay, so you're going to go in, but you know, how about if it involved a 15-minute stay at the employment interview, and then give a check-in call or a check-in text message after about the first 15 minutes, right? Another possibility would be to ask Angela to bring friends or other supporters into a meeting with us to talk about the pros and cons of going, right? To talk about the pros and cons of going to this interview, which we're concerned might be a dangerous situation. Maybe we would want to plan an immediate follow-up meeting with her, and we would want to make sure that we know that she's safe when she's completed the interview. We might also encourage Angela and ask her if she'd consider having the employer conduct the interview in a public place, like at a local coffee shop, instead of in a private residential neighborhood. So, guided by these principles of the dignity of risk and the duty to care, I think you can see that there are many options that arise, and all of them help the team avoid toxic help. Toxic help is help that hurts. It helps us avoid that by helping us avoid the extremes of neglect and overprotect. So to summarize this so far, I say that we need to avoid the extremes of neglect and overprotect. If we're in either of those places, we're not doing recovery-oriented practice, right? We need to make sure, if we're feeling conflicted about a choice that someone is making, that we don't let that conflict come between us and the individual. I recommend that teams write down examples of actually neglectful responses and overprotective responses, and exaggerate a little bit before trying to plot and apply the dignity of risk and the duty to care. And then the most important question we can ask is, how do we remain engaged with this person while respectfully exploring the choice that they are considering making? How do we remain engaged while respectfully exploring this? So that's one element of choice. Now I want to talk about another one that we don't talk about too often, and that is that there are risks if someone does not return to work or school. Right? I want to talk for a minute about the risks of not working, because I know that sometimes clinicians and mental health workers feel, oh, this person is too sick to go to work. This person is not well enough to have a job that would pay. But there are also really real risks in not working. And research has shown that being off all types of work for more than 6 months leads to poor health, both physical and mental. And the longer that we're not working, the higher the risk to our health, right? That's really important. And here's a tool that you're going to have as one of your handouts today. And it's called the Employment and Mental Health Option Grid, right? And I think this is a decision aid, and this decision aid can help people think about the risks and benefits of working and not working in relation to their own recovery. So this is a employment and mental health option grid, a decision aid that we could use with pretty much anybody who even gave an indication, an inkling that they wanted to return to work or school. And here's how it's laid out. First, I want to go over this with you. First, there's an orienting situation. Use this grid to help you and your healthcare professional talk about the benefits and risks of staying off work or looking for paid work. So that's right up at the beginning, right? And we can use that as sort of the rationale for when to use this option grid. Okay, the next column is a list of frequently asked questions. In this case, the options are, frequently asked questions. Does being at work make a difference to my mental health? What are the benefits? What are the risks? What are my choices? How soon can I return to work? Then the next two columns represent the two options. One is to continue to stay off paid work, and the other option is taking steps to return to work, either stay off work or take steps to go to work or school. And then finally, when we think about using this option grid with somebody, the idea is that we read it across, right? We read it across. So we start with a frequently asked question and we ask the person, is this something you think about? What are the risks of returning to work? And then we read the option, if you do continue to stay off paid work, what risks are there? And so, for instance, what are the risks? Option 1, continue to stay off paid work. It's difficult to predict how symptoms change, so waiting until you feel well increases the risk of never getting back to work. The more time you spend out of paid work, the harder it is to start. You risk losing your confidence and feeling isolated or becoming anxious about losing your skills and knowledge. You might also feel awkward if asked to explain a work gap to an employer. And then we go to the next column for option 2, which is taking steps to go to work. And what that says is you may feel stressed or anxious that returning to paid work will reduce any government benefits you get because you are unemployed, or that you will have to talk about your mental health condition with an employer. An employment specialist and your health provider will help you tackle these concerns. And of course, as with any worksheet, the value really lies with doing this together, So use this incredible resource that was developed by Bob Drake and Debbie Becker and other people who are the world's leaders in individual placement and support. So let's use this because it's a great tool to support people making the choice to consider returning to work. Okay. I also want to let you know that in the next session after this first talk, I'm going to be talking about another tool that helps us in situations involving the risk of returning to work during a pandemic or going to work or school for the first time during a pandemic. It's called My COVID-19 Safety Plan. We developed it here at my company, Pat Deegan and Associates, and I hope you come to the workshop to learn about that. Also hope you come on over to my website and learn about some great tools. We call them personal medicine and personal medicine cards. Personal medicine are the things we do to get well and stay well. Personal medicine can be powerful medicine that we can use on the job or at school in order to have success. So I'll give you an example, and if you're interested in this, you can go on over to my website, pat@patdeegan.com, and have a look at our personal medicine guides and our personal medicine cards. For peer specialists and others who might be interested, we also have certified personal medicine coaches if you're interested in taking and studying for that certification with us. In any case, this is Sean, and he's been studying engineering at college. And his dream is to someday be a structural engineer working on big projects such as new bridges. A few months ago, he became alarmed that the police were monitoring his activity. He began to notice lots of patterns in his environment that were actually special messages that were being sent to him. For instance, he began noticing yellow cars and black cars, and that they were warning him to get back to his dorm room quickly. In fact, now he was spending so much time in his dorm room that he was failing his coursework at school. And that's when Sean and his peer specialist decided to work personal medicine cards for false beliefs. And together they reviewed the cards, and Sean chose this card. He said he was interested in this card. And these are pocket-sized cards, that you can literally keep in your wallet or take a picture of it on your phone and have it with you. So on one side of the card it says, "I will remember things are not always what they seem to be." And on the back of the card it says, "No matter how many times we look at this illusion, the middle line always seems longer, but that's a false perception. All the lines are the same length. Sometimes our brain can trick us." And then it asks Sean to personalize this card. And that's the difference between personal medicine and generic coping strategies. Sean's going to personalize this card. So I will use this card when, and he says, when I'm noticing patterns of yellow and black cars. It could be random. The patterns might not be what they appear to be. So he photographed his completed card and he kept it on his phone. And each time he began to notice patterns, he stopped and he looked at his card. He said what he liked about it was that it's a really visual card. So I didn't even have to read the words. I would look at the lines and remind myself things aren't always what they seem to be. And for some reason, that helped me calm down a bit. I felt slightly less scared. So that's how a personal medicine card for whether it be self-injury, for anxiety, for depression, for negative thinking. We have personal medicine cards for false belief, personal medicine cards for distressing voices. No matter what it is, we've got some personal medicine cards that certainly can help folks out if you work it in this way with them. So let me just close by saying I want to thank you for all that you do. I do believe that our challenge is to be bold and brave and daring enough to remain human-hearted while working in the sometimes not so human services. I know that working during the pandemic can be really challenging. And again, thanks for all you do. And I'd like to invite you personally to join my Conspiracy of Hope. Go on over to our website, patdeegan.com, and check out the extraordinary community we've got going. There is hope for recovery, and you are part of people making the recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deegan. That was amazing and filled with lots of great information. If you would like more information or have questions for Dr. Deegan, please visit patdeegan.com.